Have you ever done something you kind of regret and then felt this weird, almost physical urge to just go take a shower or wash your hands? It's this fascinating connection, right, between our moral compass and physical cleanliness. So where does that feeling actually come from? Well, let's get into it.
You see, our story doesn't start in a modern science lab. It starts on a stage with one of Shakespeare's most famous and tragic characters, Lady Macbeth. After she pushes her husband to commit murder to steal the throne, she's just completely consumed by guilt. And this guilt famously shows up as this obsessive need to wash imaginary blood from her hands.
I mean, that one line just says it all. Out, damned spot. She isn't trying to clean a real physical stain. She's trying to scrub away a moral one. And this incredibly powerful idea, this attempt to physically wash away guilt, is the origin of a psychological phenomenon that actually bears her name.
And here it is, the formal definition, the Lady Macbeth Effect. It's the theory that when we feel morally dirty, from guilt or shame, it triggers a very real physical desire to become clean. It's this powerful and honestly really intuitive link between the metaphor of a clean conscience and the literal act of washing.
And for a while, it really looked like this wasn't just some clever literary device. Scientists thought they had found actual, hard evidence for it. And the first experiments they ran, they were incredibly clever. So the whole idea bursts onto the scientific scene in 2006 with a huge splash. A study gets published in the journal Science, which, is a massive deal, and it really seemed to prove that Lady Macbeth was onto something real.
The setup for the experiment was actually pretty simple. They basically split people into two groups. They asked one group to think about a time they did something unethical, something that made them feel guilty. And the other group, they just had to remember a time they did something good, something ethical.
Okay, so after people dredged up these memories, good or bad, they were given a really simple word puzzle. Just finish this word fragment, W blank blank H. Now you could complete it as wish, or you could complete it as wash.
And this is where it got really interesting. The folks who had just been thinking about an unethical memory, they were way more likely to finish the word as wash. The group with the clean conscience, on the other hand, showed no real preference. It was like feeling guilty literally put the idea of washing on the brain.
But the researchers didn't stop there. They took it a step further. They wanted to know if physically washing could actually make the guilt go away. So, in another experiment, they had everyone recall something immoral. Then, they let half the group wash their hands with soap and water, while the other half didn't. And then finally, they asked everyone if they'd be willing to volunteer to help out a struggling student. And the results were just fascinating. The group that didn't get to wash their hands was much more likely to agree to help. The thinking was their guilt was still hanging around, so they were looking for a way to make up for it. But the group that washed their hands, it was as if they had literally washed away their sins and didn't feel the same need to do a good deed.
And the evidence just kept mounting. Other studies found that the effect was unbelievably specific. If people told a lie out loud, they were more interested in mouthwash afterwards. If they lied in an email, they preferred hand sanitizer. It was such a compelling, neat, and elegant story.
It's a fantastic narrative, right? A famous character from literature has her psychological quirk proven by science. But, as we know, science is rarely ever that neat and tidy.
So, let's get into the next chapter of this story, because what happened next is just a classic example of science doing its thing. Other researchers were fascinated by this effect, and they tried to repeat the experiments in their own labs. And that's when things started to get messy.
And here's the crucial point. When other labs ran the exact same experiments, often with way more participants to get more reliable data, they just couldn't get the same results. The effect, it just wasn't there. And all of a sudden, the evidence for most of the original findings was seriously in doubt.
So who was right? How do you settle a scientific debate like this? Well, the community turns to one of its most powerful tools, something called a meta-analysis, which is basically a study of all the other studies, lumping their results together to get the clearest possible picture. So in 2018, researchers did just that. They gathered up all the available data from 15 different studies that had tested the Lady Macbeth effect, all to see what the total weight of the evidence really said.
And the core finding was, honestly, pretty stunning. 0. That was the number. Across all the studies done by researchers other than the original team, they found no significant statistical link between feeling a moral threat and wanting to get clean. The effect was, for all intents and purposes, 0.
So the final verdict from this huge analysis was clear. If the Lady Macbeth effect exists at all, it is incredibly tiny and weak, not this strong, reliable psychological phenomenon it first seemed to be. That beautiful, elegant story had pretty much crumbled under scrutiny. Okay, so is this just a story about a failed theory? Not at all. The journey of the Lady Macbeth effect, from its discovery to its downfall, actually tells us something far more important about the scientific process itself. Really what this shows is science working exactly as it should. A cool, fascinating idea was proposed, it was tested, then other people tried to retest it. That's called replication, and it is the absolute bedrock of good science. And when it couldn't be replicated, the community reevaluated. That's not a failure, it's a success. It's science correcting itself even when it's messy, all in the pursuit of truth.
But that leaves us with this one big, lingering question. If the scientific evidence is so weak, why does the idea of the Lady Macbeth effect just feel so right? Why do we all instinctively get what she was going through?
Well, the answer probably isn't in our brain's wiring, but in our culture and our language. Think about it. We talk about dirty money, about coming clean, or getting a clean slate. The metaphor of purity for morality is just baked into how we think and how we speak. The effect feels true because it's a story we've been telling ourselves for centuries. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway here. The Lady Macbeth effect might not hold up in a lab, but its story reveals a deeper truth about the power of metaphor in our lives. It forces us to ask, where does that real connection between a clean body and a clean conscience actually live? Perhaps not in our psychology, but in our poetry, in our language, and in the timeless stories we tell ourselves about what it means to be good.